Welcome, and thank you for joining the channel. Please help the channel by liking and subscribing. We really appreciate it. There are no ads on this video. If you have a story you would like me to share on this channel, comment down below and your story will be featured in the video. So I know I haven't posted on this channel in a while, and that is just because I've had some health concerns and difficulty with a lot of stuff. I have had multiple seizures and had to be hospitalized for a little bit, but since we have the health concerns under control, we are now going back to daily videos. So if you guys will have any videos you guys would like to recommend, just comment down below and I will read them. So now, sit back, relax, and enjoy this creepypasta accompanied with rain and thunder. I recently put my daughter in daycare. I didn't want to do it, but being that I'm a single parent, I don't have much of a choice. After lots of research, I found a daycare center that seemed like a good fit. It was run by a girl named Wendy and seemed fairly popular in the neighborhood, as there were a number of kids there when I went to investigate. One of the things I particularly liked about it was the fact that they had security cameras set up around the center so that parents can get access to them and check on their kids. It quickly became an obsession of mine. All the kids wore jackets that the daycare provided because the air conditioner had been on the fritz, so it was quite cold there. But it was easy to tell which little girl was mine. I loved being able to watch my daughter play with other kids as I worked, and it gave me a peace of mind knowing that she was doing alright. I couldn't keep my eyes glued to the screen the entire time, but in passing I saw that she had made a friend she played with almost every day, and even had a favorite toy. It was a little medicine ball that she and her friend would toss back and forth. They played with it every day. After about a week, things seemed to be going quite well. My little girl had started really grasping potty training. It was more well-behaved than I'd ever known her to be. Needless to say, I was impressed with the daycare. That was when the singing started. She hummed it at first, and when I asked her what it was, she told me it was a song that they taught her in daycare. Eventually, she learned the words and began to sing. We eat their teeth, and they eat their bones, and slit their throats inside their homes. We sing this song, and when we're done, we'll go to hell and have more fun. She sang it all the time, no matter how many times I had to ask her to stop. It made my skin crawl. Why would they teach a song like that to children? The next day, with the song stuck in my head, I resolved to call Wendy. I wanted to tell her that I disapproved of that song and I didn't want that or anything else like that taught to my daughter. If I continued, I would be forced to find a new daycare. As I watched the children play on my computer screen, my little girl playing with the ball like she always did, I picked up my phone and called the daycare. When Wendy answered, I told her about my concern. She was incredibly polite about it and said that one of the other children had been going around singing it. She said she thought it was from a movie or something, but she was working on putting a stop to it, because that song was definitely not for children. She said it disturbed her as much as it disturbed me. I'd been pacing around my office as I spoke to her, and just as we were saying goodbye, I looked back down at the screen and noticed something peculiar. The Wendy on the screen was not on the phone, but was helping a child with his juice box. She said goodbye and I hung up the phone, and I watched the cameras, not reciprocating her farewell, but transfixed on the screen in front of me. I stared at my daughter and her friend playing with the ball and tried to think of how many times I've seen her drop it as they tossed it back and forth. I didn't think I'd ever seen her drop it, It didn't really happen that much. And the kid in the corner was always in the corner, working on the same puzzle. How long had he been working on that puzzle? That's when I began to suspect that instead of watching a live feed, I'd been watching a recording. I took my daughter out of the daycare immediately. I couldn't allow her to keep going to that daycare until I found out what was going on. And even then, I still doubted I'd ever let her go back. My boss, being a single parent herself, allowed me a week from work. But I still had to work from home, but I didn't really mind, so I could still watch my daughter and find another daycare center. She wouldn't stop singing that song though. Every morning before I even went into her room to wake her up, I could hear her singing it. And at night, after I put her to bed and I thought she was asleep, I could hear that song coming from her room. It played back over and over again in my dreams and in my head. I found it hard to focus on my job and on the search for a new daycare. So when she finally stopped singing, and it was finally out of my head, my relief was immense and full. Silence filled the house, and for several minutes, I couldn't imagine anything more peaceful. It was as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders for the first time in days, and I could finally suck in a full breath of air. That's when the silence broke. My stomach knotted even tighter. A feral, terrified scream tore through the house like a frightened train. I had never heard anything like it. It was like a growling, screeching sound, and immediately my mind leapt back into the verses of the song. We eat their teeth, we eat their bones. I leapt from my desk and followed the noise instantly. It stopped before I entered my daughter's room, which is where I was led, and in that split second, my heart also stopped. The suddenness by which the sound ceased was almost as unsettling as the sound itself. When I stepped in, I didn't see anything at first, not even my daughter. But then I seen her crouched in the corner of her room with her back to me. She looked like she was busy with something, and I could hear a strange sound that even now I can't describe. I rushed towards her and picked her up, and my hands felt a sticky wetness on her clothes. It was warm and thick, and it reminded me of cough syrup, or maybe like sweet syrup. I can't explain it. I turned her around and saw that what I was touching was the blood that covered in front of her shirt. And I immediately panicked. I didn't think of anything else other than to find where she was bleeding. I carried her into the bathroom and ripped her shirt off and scrubbed quickly with washcloth to find the cut. I found a few scratches on her arm and scrubbed harder, looking for the source of so much blood. I found nothing. In my panic to clean her up, I hadn't noticed until that moment that she wasn't crying, or even making a sound at all. I looked up to her face, and aside from the blood that was smeared across her chin, she looked completely fine. Her jaw worked up and down, chewing on something, and with shaky fingers I fished it out of her mouth. It looked like a thin piece of leather. I threw it in the trash and wiped my fingers on my jeans and picked up my daughter to carry her to her bedroom to investigate the origin of the blood. In the corner of her bedroom, where I'd originally seen her crouch, was a dead, bloody tangle of fur and tendons that I immediately recognized as the cat I'd adopted from the shelter only a year ago. It was missing an ear. I screamed at her. I screamed out of fear and anger and panic at my daughter, who just stood there next to me with blood drying on her hands, arms, and face, with her blue eyes stared back at me like blank pools of water. I put her in the bathtub while I cleaned up the mess in her bedroom. I scrubbed with hydrogen peroxide and carpet detergent until my arms were sore, but by the end of it, there was still a small brownish stain that would serve as a reminder of what had happened to my cat. In the bathroom, I heard the echoes of my daughter's voice as she sang the song again. I didn't sleep much that night. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw the corpse of my cat lying in the corner, and my stomach knotted up even tighter. When I did finally fall asleep, it was only for a few hours. I awoke at 3 to the muffled voice of my daughter through the walls. She was praying. She said the following prayer 3 times without pausing. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul. And when I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. We'll play and sing among the dead, and he shall feed us blood and bread. I'll do his work until sunrise, and love him forever, the Prince of all lives. When she was done, she said amen, and I heard her crawl back into bed. I got intermittent sleep after that, but not much. Just like the song, that prayer was stuck in my head, and it made me sick. The next morning, I found her sleeping deeply in bed, covered in a pool of her own urine. She hadn't wet the bed at all since I started her in that daycare, and even before that, I thought we had overcome that particular hurdle. But when I stepped into the room, the sickly sweet scent of urine and ammonia mixed with the rotten stench of feces filled the room and made my eyes water. I found that she not only wet the wet bed, but had also had diarrhea as well. I gagged and picked her up and carried her, half asleep still, to the shower. As I cleaned her and she became more conscious, she looked at me with tired eyes. She didn't look like she slept much at all. When she spoke, her voice was dry and hoarse, but more sincere than anything she said over the past few days. You are going to burn. I asked around to see if I could find anyone else whose kids went to that daycare. It took me a couple days, but I finally found a friend of a friend's cousin whose son was enrolled. I contacted him via Facebook and set up a meeting with him at his house. I brought my daughter so she could play with his son while we talked in private. He and his wife both worked full-time and seemed shocked when I first suggested that something in the daycare was amiss. They said that their son, Brian, had never been better behaved then since he started going to the daycare. He went to bed without being told, cleaned up his toys, and hadn't thrown a tantrum in 3 weeks since he was first enrolled. I asked if they regularly checked the cameras. They admitted that, although they did a few times, they didn't really sign in to watch on a regular basis. When I suggested the possibility of the cameras being a pre-recording, they said they honestly hadn't noticed. I told them about the strange song I heard my daughter sing and the strange way she's been acting. I didn't mention the cat, however, because I didn't want to be accused of being a neglectful parent. They said they heard Brian humming something, but the words never came up. Hesitantly, I asked if they had a pet. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a flicker of concern in their eye. Then Brian's father spoke and said they didn't. But I'd seen that look in their eyes, and that spoke volumes more than anything else they had said. When we were done, I took my daughter and left. That was the last time I or anyone else spoke to either of Brian's parents. The following morning, I saw on the news that both parents had been killed in their bed, and their son was now missing. When I put my daughter to bed the following evening, I decided to try and talk to her about it. I had deliberated over my questions all day and had finally decided on what specifically I wanted to ask her. I transcribed the questions and answers to the best of my ability to learn. What sort of games did you play at the daycare with Miss Wendy? We play imagination games. Who taught you the song that you sing? Miss Derry? Who's Miss Derry? I don't know. Is she friends with Miss Wendy? No. She plays the imagination games with us. Did she teach you to say that prayer at night? What prayer? The one I heard you saying the other night. I repeated the prayer. I don't know. I just know it. Why did you kill Tony? The name of the cat. I had to. Why? He wasn't going to let them in. Let who in? I don't know. I asked if anyone had abused her at all. She didn't understand and had to explain. I won't go into detail here, but when she understood my question, she confirmed that she had not been abused whatsoever. What did you mean when you said I was going to burn? I don't know. Why did you say it? You told me to. Who? Miss Terry. When did she tell you that? Just before I said it. Does she talk to you often? Sometimes. Is she talking to you now? No. Why not? She's waiting for you to leave. Those 6 words hung between us, amidst the silence that was almost palpable. Her eyes drifted upwards and fixed on a space behind me. I turned slowly and saw nothing but an empty room. I shook my head, then kissed her on the cheek and clicked off the light, but not before checking to make sure the window was locked. I needed a drink, and I needed to think. Something was going on, but how could I draw the line in the sand between the supernatural, if that's really what it was, and the imagination of a child? As I sat in the living room sipping a glass of whiskey and contemplating these things, I felt a chill in the air, like the AC had kicked on. Except, no, the house remained as silent as the grave. That was when I saw her standing at the end of the hall. I thought she must be sleepwalking. Given the circumstances, I honestly half expected it. I drained the glass, savoring the spicy wooden flavor of the whiskey, and stood for my seat. I called out to her, but she didn't answer. She simply stood there, limply, at the end of the hall. I began to walk towards her, and it was then that I saw the metallic glimmer in her hand. She was holding a kitchen knife. I hurried towards her now, calling her name and trying to wake her up before she hurt herself, but when she looked at me, I froze. Her eyes were black, and her lips were pulled tight in a grin so wide that I could count all of her teeth if I had the mind to. Tears ran down her cheeks and splashed against the carpet. I couldn't think of anything else to do, so I began to recite the Lord's Prayer. She didn't do anything. I wasn't sure what I expected her to do. Perhaps I'd seen way too many horror movies, or perhaps my hopes of salvation were too high, but she did nothing but stand there, listening to my recitation of the scripture. Eventually, I fell silent. When she took a step forward, it was rigid, like her limbs were wrapped in splints and she was being controlled by a puppeteer. I backed away slowly and pulled out my cell phone and dialed 911. The woman answered the line, but I couldn't hear much more than static on the other end when she tried to speak. I told her that I needed help and that my daughter needed an ambulance, but I wasn't sure if she heard me because right afterwards the phone ended the connection and the battery, which had been at 50% only 20 minutes before, was drained. She continued to step forward, and with each step she repeated her song. We eat their teeth. We eat their bones. I felt even colder then, and the room seemed to get darker. I thought I saw then the faint figure of a woman and a little girl standing at the end of the hallway just before the light bulb went out. We slit their throats inside their home. I rushed towards my daughter then. I lunged for the knife in her hand, and it came up in an arc that glinted from the light behind me. I felt the warm pain in my forearm as it cut through my skin, but I snatched at it. I caught it just above the handle, and the metal tore at my palm as I wrenched it away from her. I threw the knife behind me and heard it clatter to the floor. I picked up my little girl in a bear hug and held her as she fought to scratch and bite me. When I felt the tugging against me, my blood turned to ice. I couldn't see anything, but I felt something in the dark working against my embrace, pulling at my daughter's feet. I pulled harder and screamed in extortion, but one of my daughter's fingers found its way to the slit in my forearms and dug deeply into my flesh. I dropped her from the pain and knew that I made a dire error. Like a limp doll, I saw my daughter pulled into the end of the dark hallway and disappear into the shadow. I ran after her and clicked on the light in her bedroom to illuminate the rest of the hall from the ambience, but the hallway was empty. My daughter was gone. The police came in shortly after, and I told them that someone had taken her. I didn't think they'd believe my story, otherwise they launched a full investigation, but I don't think they'll ever find her. I went back to the daycare the next morning, but the building where I'd once dropped my daughter off was nothing more than an empty warehouse with a pink notice of condemnation taped on the inside of the window. The website I once logged into to check the cameras no longer exists either, not even in my internet history. I still wake up at night. It's usually around 3 in the morning, and I could feel that same coolness that I felt the night that she disappeared. Once, I thought I could even hear a whisper coming through the silence. It wasn't her voice, but I could make out 3 words. I was them. I don't know what language it is, but it stuck with me ever since. If anyone has any information on the whereabouts about my little girl, please let me know. Her name is Dorothy. She's 3 years old, has blonde hair and blue eyes, and was last seen wearing pink pajamas.